Is it better to rent or to buy? The way that most of us think is that renting is like throwing your money away, and it's only useful until we can save up and put down a deposit on a house. After all, renting is just paying your landlord's mortgage. You might as well pay for your own instead, right? Well, actually, it's not quite as simple as it first seems, but using what's known as the 5% rule, we can make it really simple. So in this video, we're going to compare the costs of renting versus buying, using the help of Ben Felix's 5% rule. I'm going to explain how the 5% rule can give you a good idea on whether you should consider renting or buying, and I'll tell you what I'm personally going to be doing myself. So when people compare renting with buying, they usually take the cost of the mortgage and they compare that with the cost of renting. Let's say both come to $1,000 per month. If you're going to be paying $1,000 regardless, well, it's easy to understand why we then all conclude that buying clearly makes sense out of those two options. However, there's a problem with comparing these two numbers. It leaves out some other key numbers. So using the 5% rule, let's break things down into two categories. Number one, an investment. This could be into your home by paying the mortgage, money invested into the stock market, or investing into your own business. This is money which you're spending in a positive way to get a financial return in the long run. The second category is called unrecoverable costs. Unlike an investment, this is money you're spending which essentially disappears from your pocket and you get nothing back from it in the long term. Paying rent, for example. You might get to use the house you're renting for the next month, but after that month finishes, your money has gone and now you have to pay again. Looking at this, it's easy to see why so many of us conclude that buying is always better. I'll be honest, until I came across the 5% rule, that is exactly how I thought. But the thing is, when it comes to buying a house, we also have some hidden costs too. Costs that people often overlook. So let's wipe that screen and we'll compare the true costs of buying versus renting on this one. Of course, when you rent, every dollar you spend is unrecoverable. When you buy a property, the first hidden cost is maintenance costs. You see, if you're renting and your boiler breaks down or your roof leaks, it's your landlord's problem. If, however, you own the place, you're the one forking out money to fix it. Generally speaking, it costs around 1% of the value of the house to maintain it each year. We also have to consider property taxes. While these vary depending on your location, a good estimation is another 1%. And the final hidden cost is the cost of debt or the cost of equity. So when you buy a property, generally speaking, you're going to take out a mortgage. Let's say you put down a deposit of 20% and you borrow the other 80%. On that 80%, you pay an interest rate. The exact interest rate you're going to pay will be dependent on your credit score, your income, and several other factors. For our example though, we're going to use 3%, as this is roughly an average for people today in the US. So I think these elements so far are quite self-explanatory. We can all get our heads around the idea of paying maintenance costs, property tax, and interest on our mortgage. The next element sounds more complex than it really is, but it's really simple, and I'm going to talk you through it. We also have to consider the cost of equity. So this is what is known as opportunity cost. In fact, hold on a second, I'm going to grab some props to explain. So let's imagine I'm out at a restaurant and I want to buy a drink. I could opt for a Coke, or I could opt for a juice mixed with water instead. But I only have enough money with me to buy just one of these, so I must choose between them. Now the Coke is tastier and it would really satisfy my craving for something sugary, but the juice is healthier and it will leave me feeling hydrated. If I pick the Coke, I get taste, but I sacrifice health. If I pick the juice, I get the healthier option, but I kind of sacrifice taste. Whichever drink I pick, I have to give up the benefit that the other drink could offer me. This is opportunity cost. The cost that I'm paying when I pick one of these two options is that I miss out on the opportunity to have the other, and hence is called the opportunity cost. So how does that example apply to buying a house? Well, let's say you save up $50,000 to put down as a deposit. Now you have two options. You could either use it as a deposit for a property, or you could continue renting and invest that same $50,000 into the stock market. Again, going back to our example from earlier, you can't pick both things. You can only choose one. So to understand the opportunity cost of picking either option, we need to look at the finances for both. We need to really understand how much money each of those two options, investing in property or investing in the stock market, is going to return us. According to the Credit Suisse Global Investment Returns Yearbook, the average global return for property is 3% per year. Global stocks return 6.9% per year. However, Ben Felix and PWL Capital have calculated the stock should return a slightly lower 6.57% for the coming decade. So I know what you might be thinking. 3%? Are you crazy? Is that all you think house prices go up each year? Well, property is a very localized market. Maybe you're living in an area where house prices are rising much more quickly. Maybe house prices have instead been going down in your area recently. The reason that we use 3% is because we always want to use averages with these types of calculations. If we start trying to think that we know better, unless we're really qualified, we often fall into traps. So if we take 3% from 6.57%, we can see that buying a property leaves an investor with an opportunity cost of 3.57%. However, to play things safe and to be conservative, Ben rounded this value down to 3, giving us a cost of equity of 3%. So if we pull up our chart from earlier, we can now add 3% as the cost of debt or the cost of equity. 1% plus 1% plus 3%, of course, gives us 5. And this is how we reach the 5% rule. But wait, what does this actually tell us? What do we do with this 5%? Well, let's run through an example. So let's say you're considering buying a property for $250,000. And of course, feel free to use your own numbers instead here. First, we multiply the value of the home by 5%, and then we divide it by 12 as there are 12 months in the year. So on our calculators, this would be 250,000 times 0.05. Divide this number by 12 to get a monthly number, and this gives us a final result of $1,040. So this number right here, $1,040, this gives us a rough idea of how much we are paying in unrecoverable costs each month when we buy a property. This takes into account the hidden costs that we don't usually think about. And then the general rule is, if you can rent for less than that, less than your final number, it makes good financial sense to do so. If, however, rent costs more than that final number, more than $1,040, it probably makes more sense to buy. So what the 5% rule does is it exposes the hidden costs with buying a house, and then it gives us a threshold. Anything below that number, we should probably rent. Anything above, we should probably buy. But of course, this isn't a perfect solution. I wish it were possible for me to devise a perfectly tailored solution for your personal situation, but of course, it's not. So I want you to consider a few things, and then I'll tell you what I think of the rule and what I'm planning to do in the next few years. So in our example, when we calculated the opportunity cost, do you remember the example from earlier with the Coke and the juice? With that, we assumed that if you didn't spend the money you saved up on your house, then you'd be investing that money instead into the stock market. If, however, you took some of that money and invested it into other investments, say if they return less in the stock market, then that skews the number in favor of buying a property. On the flip side, if you could achieve a higher return with your investments, it would maybe make you think about renting for a bit longer and then using the higher returns to buy a property further down the line. The other thing is, honestly, would you invest 100% of that money? So in our example earlier, you save $50,000 and you could buy a property with that, or you could invest it into the stock market. But would you actually invest all of it? Or would you instead be tempted to spend some money on a few other things? This is all about knowing you and being honest with yourself. Because you see, one of the best things about owning a property for the average person is that the mortgage forces you to invest a little bit each month into buying the house. Each month you have no choice but to invest some of your money into property. And I think as most of us have a slight spender's mentality and aren't the best at saving, having this saving forced upon us each month is nearly always a very good thing. So, what do I think of the 5% rule? I think it's a great guide so you can calculate the unseen costs of buying property. At the same time though, I'll tell you honestly, I want to buy a property more than I want to rent. There's this part of my brain which is ultra logical and runs the numbers just like a robot. That part of my brain is telling me that renting is better and that I can use that money I save instead of buying the property to invest elsewhere. But just like you, I have another part of my brain which is much more emotional, and that side is screaming at me that owning a property is safety. If I own a flat or a house, well, in the worst case scenario, at least I'll have somewhere to live once I've paid off the mortgage, whereas renting doesn't give me that safety net. So overall, the way I think is, well, I've been full-time making these videos on YouTube for you and running other related businesses for the past 3 years since leaving university. And there have been some incredible times along the way. Recently, many of you joined my somewhat crazy journey, and I'm truly so grateful to every single one of you who has. I honestly can't thank you enough. But there have also been some really tough times along the way where, to tell you the truth, at times I honestly couldn't see a clear path forwards on YouTube. I mean, when you go on this platform, YouTube, you often see people who have already succeeded. But there are many more people like myself who go through some serious ups and downs along the way. And when I look to the future, I hope that this channel continues growing and there are more ups than downs. But I've learned really the hard way that I simply don't know what's coming next. So even though I'm normally quite a logical, mathematical, rational person, when it comes to the debate of renting versus buying, myself and my girlfriend want to buy somewhere and pay it off, instead of renting for many years. We want to have a roof over our heads, and I want breathing space so I can continue making videos like this for you. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, I release videos every Tuesday and Friday, so please make sure you are subscribed. Check out this video up here that I'm sure you're going to enjoy. And of course, again, just thank you for watching.